In 48 BCE, the streets of Alexandria trembled beneath the march of Roman boots. Julius Caesar had come to Egypt, not just as a general, but as a kingmaker. Caught in the brutal civil war between Cleopatra VII and her brother Ptolemy XIII, Caesar threw his support behind Cleopatra and made powerful enemies in the process. As the battle for the city raged, Caesar made a desperate move. To deny his enemies control of the harbour, he ordered his troops to set fire to the Egyptian fleet. The fire did more than consume ships. It leapt from the docks to the city itself, spreading through storehouses, marketplaces, and, according to many ancient sources, to the quarter that housed the greatest centre of learning the world had ever known, the Great Library of Alexandria. Built under the Ptolemaic dynasty, the library was more than just a building. It was the beating heart of ancient scholarship, a place where mathematicians, astronomers, poets and philosophers gathered to preserve and expand all human knowledge. Some estimates suggest it held over 400,000 scrolls, works from Greece, Egypt, India, Persia, even early records from distant China. And then, it was gone. The flames are said to have consumed much of the collection, and though the library lingered in some form for centuries after, it would never again reach its former glory. Humanity lost untold wisdom, entire plays by Sophocles, lost dialogues of Aristotle, advanced theories in mathematics, astronomy, and medicine, all vanished in a single night of chaos. But what if it hadn't? What if the fire had been contained? What if the Great Library, and its sister institution, the Musaeum, had survived Caesar's siege? What if the knowledge of 1,000 civilizations had remained intact, copied, translated and studied through the centuries? What if the flame of ancient science had never gone out? Let's imagine a world where the Library of Alexandria survived. And let's begin. In the year 48 BCE, Alexandria burns. But not all is lost. As the flames rage through the dockyards, they begin to creep inland. The wind carries embers toward the Bruttian district, home to the Great Library, the Musaeum, and the scholars who serve the intellectual soul of the Ptolemaic kingdom. But this time, the fire does not reach them. Why? Because Cleopatra had been warned. In the months leading up to Caesar's arrival, tensions between the royal siblings had escalated into open conflict. Cleopatra, ever the strategist, anticipated that the war might reach the city itself, and she knew the value, the power, of the knowledge hidden in those scrolls. At the urging of her court philosopher Dion of Cyrene, she ordered a quiet but determined effort to safeguard Alexandria's treasures. Thousands of scrolls were moved from vulnerable surface buildings into stone vaults, carved deep beneath the museum. These vaults, modelled on ancient Egyptian tombs, were designed to resist fire, flood, and time. And when the fire began to spread during Caesar's siege, a second, even more unlikely group took action. The Scholars' Defense Corps, librarians, scribes, mathematicians, and even old Ptolemaic veterans formed an emergency brigade. Armed with little more than buckets, ropes, and sheer resolve, they coordinated with Roman engineers, men desperate to save their own rations and powder stores from destruction. Together, they dug firebreaks. They hauled water from the harbour. They created barriers of soaked cloth and clay, and above all, they protected the vaults. The flames still consumed parts of Alexandria, warehouses, markets, even entire neighbourhoods. But when the smoke cleared, the library still stood, the museum still functioned. The scrolls, the scholars, the knowledge had survived. Some losses were inevitable. Duplicates, commentaries, the more recent acquisitions stored near the port, gone. But over 80% of the library's holdings remained intact. Cleopatra knew the opportunity this presented. She declared the library a protected sanctuary of the state, placing it under direct royal patronage and stationing loyal troops nearby. And Caesar, he was impressed. Flattered by the scholars, intrigued by their learning, and, some say, amused by the idea of philosopher firefighters, Caesar allowed the institutions to continue unmolested. He even requested copies of certain scrolls to be sent to Rome. In our timeline, the siege of Alexandria marked the beginning of a slow decline for the library. But in this timeline, it becomes the start of a second golden age. The Great Library of Alexandria had survived its first great trial. Now, it would begin to change the world. With the fire behind them and the scrolls intact, Alexandria stood at the edge of a new era. Cleopatra VII, now firmly aligned with Julius Caesar, did not squander the library's survival. She understood its value, not just as a symbol, but as a weapon of influence, and she intended to wield it. Under her orders, the Musaeum was expanded and reorganized. New patronage systems were introduced. Scholars from Greece, Egypt, Judea, and even far-off Parthia were offered stipends to live, study, and teach in Alexandria. The library's cataloguing system was refined, and translations of foreign works, Sanskrit treatises, Persian cosmologies, Babylonian astronomical records were elevated in importance. But it wasn't just about collecting old knowledge. The library became active, a center for innovation, debate, and experimentation. Philosophers like Dion of Cyrene began hosting structured public lectures on natural philosophy. Engineers built small-scale models of hydraulic machines and early clockwork devices based on the ideas of Archimedes and Ctesibius. The Musaeum, long a kind of intellectual monastery, began to resemble something closer to a university, a dynamic, state-supported engine of discovery. And in Rome, Julius Caesar, ever a man of vision, took note. He ordered that a sister institution be founded in the capital, a smaller but well-funded library of the capital, inspired by Alexandria. He requested copies of key works on mathematics, astronomy, and engineering. Roman architects began studying Hellenistic blueprints for aqueduct improvements, and Caesar's own calendar reform, the Julian calendar, was revised with input from Egyptian astronomers attached to the Musaeum. One of the first major breakthroughs of this new age came in 46 BCE, when Alexandrian scholars, working from Babylonian star charts and Aristarchus of Samos's heliocentric theory, produced an improved model of the solar system, one that correctly placed the sun at the center and explained planetary retrograde motion using elliptical orbits. Though the model lacked modern precision, it was centuries ahead of its time. Still, not everyone celebrated. In Ptolemaic court politics, the growing prestige of the library became a source of jealousy. Some priests of traditional Egyptian temples accused the Musaeum of undermining native beliefs. In Rome, conservative senators questioned the wisdom of importing Greek-Egyptian wizardry into the Republic, and when Caesar was assassinated in 44 BCE, the fate of the Alexandrian alliance and the library's future influence in the Roman world was thrown into uncertainty. But Cleopatra acted swiftly. She returned to Alexandria, reasserted her authority, and declared the library and museum sacred institutions of Ma'at, divine order, blending Egyptian religious legitimacy with Greek intellectual prestige. The result? By 38 BCE, the Great Library of Alexandria was not just surviving, it was thriving. More than a vault of ancient scrolls, it had become a living institution, protected by a queen, studied by a continent, and poised to shape the future of the Mediterranean world. The flame of knowledge had been preserved. Now, it was beginning to spread. By 38 BCE, the Great Library of Alexandria was more than a symbol. It was an empire of the mind. While civil wars fractured Rome and rivals scrambled for control of Caesar's legacy, Cleopatra VII played a longer game. Her power no longer rested solely on dynastic claims or Roman alliances. It now rested on something far more enduring: knowledge. Through the Musaeum, Cleopatra forged what historians in our timeline never saw: a soft power network of scholarship and diplomacy. She invited foreign elites to send their brightest students to Alexandria. Parthian envoys studied political science alongside Athenian rhetoricians. Nubian astronomers worked with Jewish mathematicians. A scholar from the city of Massalia, modern-day Marseille, translated Egyptian agricultural techniques into Latin, sparking improvements in crop rotation throughout Roman Gaul. And at the heart of it all, the scrolls. The library's massive collection was being copied and distributed like never before. While earlier Ptolemies had hoarded manuscripts, Cleopatra did the opposite. She shared them, selectively. Ties to Alexandria now meant access to knowledge no one else had. This created a ripple effect throughout the Mediterranean world. In Pergamon, the rival library was no longer seen as Alexandria's equal, but its junior partner. Scholars there began referencing the Alexandrian method, a new standard of annotation, cross-referencing, and experimental replication developed in the Musaeum. In Rome, Octavian, soon to be Augustus, found himself in an ideological arms race. With Cleopatra's court increasingly seen as enlightened and advanced, Octavian's propagandists painted her not just as a foreign queen, but as a dangerous intellectual rival. The claim that she had enslaved Caesar with her knowledge and mystery took on a darker tone in this alternate timeline, with special focus on her control of the library. But Rome couldn't resist Alexandria's gravity forever. Roman generals began hiring Alexandrian tutors for their sons. Civil engineers studied imported scrolls describing Archimedean principles. Even the Senate, once hostile to Greek science, passed a resolution in 32 BCE commissioning a Roman compendium of Alexandrian science to be compiled by visiting scholars in Ostia. Meanwhile, within Alexandria, breakthroughs continued. Medical researchers built on Hippocratic and Egyptian texts to formalize early methods of clinical observation. A group of engineers experimenting with steam pressure and siphons developed a primitive pressure valve that would, in a later age, be seen as a prototype for the Industrial Revolution. And yet, this golden decade ended on the edge of war. Octavian, consolidating power in Rome, could not allow Cleopatra and Mark Antony to dominate both Egypt and its intellectual empire. He painted their alliance as a threat to Roman values, a foreign, decadent, overly clever kingdom led by a sorceress queen and her spellbound Roman lover. In 32 BCE, the stage was set for confrontation. Alexandria, radiant with knowledge and ambition, would soon face the hard edge of Roman steel. But in this world, it wasn't just Cleopatra's throne at stake, it was the future of human knowledge itself. In 31 BCE, at the Battle of Actium, the tides of history turned once again. Octavian's forces triumphed, Cleopatra and Mark Antony fell. Egypt became a Roman province. In our timeline, that was the end of the library's golden age. But in this world, it was only the beginning. Octavian, now Augustus, understood that Alexandria was no longer just a provincial city. It was a nexus of knowledge, a prize too valuable to destroy. Rather than burn it, he absorbed it. Rather than fear its influence, he claimed it as part of Rome's new imperial identity. The Musaeum was placed under joint Roman-Egyptian administration. Funding continued, scholars stayed, and knowledge flowed north to the capital. In time, Alexandria became the intellectual capital of the empire, the beating heart of a Mediterranean enlightenment that would stretch for centuries. The results were profound. By the 1st century CE, the heliocentric model of the solar system was not only proposed, it was debated, tested, and taught in major cities from Antioch to Carthage. Astronomers began using refined astrolabes to measure planetary motion with precision centuries ahead of their time. Greek and Indian mathematical traditions met in Alexandria's halls, producing an early form of algebra 1,000 years before it emerged in our own timeline. Concepts of zero, infinity, and abstract number theory entered Roman discourse. By the 2nd century CE, Roman engineers were using Alexandrian principles to construct automated irrigation systems, hydraulic mining machines, and proto-industrial workshops powered by steam pressure and treadmills, rudimentary but revolutionary. Medicine advanced too. Anatomical research, once taboo, was normalized under Alexandrian protocols of ethical dissection. Public health infrastructure in Rome and its provinces benefited from ideas rooted in both Egyptian and Indian medical texts housed in the library. And religion? The library became a battleground of ideas, a place where early Christian thinkers debated Stoics, Jews, and followers of older pagan cults in open forums. But unlike in our timeline, where religious conflict led to the library's final destruction centuries later, here, its protected status as a neutral ground for all philosophies endured, at least for a time. The result was a world where intellectual pluralism became tradition, not exception. And then the changes accelerated. By the 4th century CE, as Rome declined politically, its scientific institutions did not. The Alexandrian continuum, as later historians would call it, shifted the center of innovation south and east, to Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, and eventually China, all interconnected through a vast network of translated texts and scholarly exchanges. There was no dark age in this timeline, only a slow, uneven, but persistent climb upward. When the printing press was developed, centuries earlier than in our own world, it was born not in Mainz, but in Byzantine Alexandria, where scholars had long experimented with movable glyphs and ink-rolling machines to copy scrolls faster. By the 10th century, wind-powered paper mills and mechanized looms turned Alexandria and its sister cities into industrial powerhouses centuries ahead of schedule. By the 12th, an oceanic expedition funded jointly by Andalusian merchants and Alexandrian engineers successfully mapped the western Atlantic, inspired by long-forgotten Phoenician records once thought lost, until a pristine copy surfaced deep within the library's fireproof vaults. And what of our world? No Galileo silenced, no Hypatia murdered, no thousands of years of rediscovery. The questions that plagued humanity for millennia about the stars, the mind, the body, the earth, were asked earlier, answered sooner, and built upon faster. Because the Library of Alexandria had not fallen, it had survived. And in doing so, it had changed everything. Sometimes all it takes is a single spark, not to burn it down, but to light the world.